Chapter 1. The Unseen Giant. Kala stood at the edge of the vast plains of Valor Prime, where the wind whispered through the tall grasses and the suns hung low in the sky, casting a warm amber glow over the landscape. The two twin suns, Hara and Voro, were close to the horizon, their rays stretching across the rocky terrain, giving everything an ethereal, almost haunting quality. Yet Kala, despite being bathed in the stunning colors of the evening light, felt none of its beauty. Instead, she felt the weight of isolation that had accompanied her throughout her entire existence on this planet. She was a giant among her people, the Oravi, and in their eyes, she was a curse, a reminder of everything that went wrong with their race's evolution. Her massive frame, broad shoulders, and towering height were traits that should have made her a queen among her species, yet they did the opposite. They made her an outcast, a social pariah who could never fit in. Where others saw her as a reflection of strength, beauty, and power, she was shunned for her size, regarded as a threat rather than an ally. Her days were spent in the quiet solitude of the outskirts of Rinnoc, the great city where the Oravi made their home. No one dared approach her, and when she did venture into the city for supplies or trade, she could feel the glances of discomfort and distaste. It was a silent rejection, one that spoke volumes even in the absence of words. Men, especially, would avert their eyes, fearful that they might somehow provoke her, not understanding the complexities of her existence. They saw only her height, her strength, and the unsettling power that radiated from her. They saw her as a danger, someone who could break them with a single blow, not someone who might love, care, or understand. This had been Kala's life for as long as she could remember, watching others with envy as they formed families, shared quiet moments of joy, and lived their lives in peaceful unity, while she stood apart in the shadows. Her mother, the Shatterbone matriarch, had once been the most respected of their people. She had been powerful, wise, and revered for her leadership. But even she, the most formidable of Oravi, had been unable to protect her daughter from the cruel whispers of the tribe. Kala had long ceased to care about the whispers, though the loneliness gnawed at her soul like a constant ache. But today, as she looked across the horizon, she couldn't help but feel something stirring inside her. Today, there was something different in the air, a change she couldn't quite place. She had been waiting for this day, hoping for some spark of change that might finally give her a chance at a life beyond the solitary existence she had known. Her reflection in the dark waters of the nearby lake, however, was a reminder of her curse. Her face was beautiful, with high cheekbones, lips full but sharp, and the striking violet eyes that were the mark of her lineage. Her hair, long and wild, was the deep silver of her race, flowing like a river of liquid metal down her back. It was a beauty that made many stop in their tracks when they saw her, but it was never enough to overcome her towering stature, her broad frame, the muscles that rippled beneath her skin, so defined that they looked sculpted from stone. She could see the way others reacted to her men, in particular how they flinched when she passed by, how their eyes would dart away quickly, like prey sensing danger. It was a familiar pain, one she had grown accustomed to, but it still stung. No one had ever dared approach her with any kind of interest, at least not in the way that mattered. Oh, there were always those who wanted to speak to her, men who wanted her strength, or wanted to learn about her abilities, hoping to gain something for themselves. But it was never for love. It was never for the connection she so desperately longed for. She had watched, year after year, as others paired off, created families, and lived their lives in happiness, while she stood by, an unwilling observer to a world that had no place for her. The other Oravi, particularly the men, could never understand. The smaller stature of their species meant that their biology was in constant conflict with her own. The males were delicate, fragile, built for agility and intelligence, but not for raw strength. A union between Kala and any Oravi male was considered unnatural, as it was thought that the genetic differences between her and the others would lead to disastrous results. There had been rumors in her youth, stories about how the offspring of such unions might be too powerful, too dominant, too much for the planet to handle. This fear had been instilled in her from an early age, and though she had learned to ignore it, the hurt was still there. She was too much, too strong, too tall, too intimidating, and in the eyes of her people, that made her undesirable, dangerous. For years, Calla had thought that she might be doomed to spend her entire life alone. But today, as the winds shifted across the plains and the twin suns sank lower in the sky, she felt something stir within her, something ancient, something primal. She couldn't explain it, but it felt as though the universe itself was about to deliver a message to her. Something was changing. Something was coming. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden appearance of a ship on the horizon. It was small, sleek, and far different from the usual vessels that visited Valor Prime. As the ship descended, Calla's sharp eyes took in every detail. It was a human ship, a human vessel. The sight of it sent a jolt through her system. The humans were known throughout the galaxy for their resilience and their strength, though their physical stature was nowhere near that of the Oravi. They were a strange, stubborn species, often misunderstood by those who had never encountered them. But Calla had heard stories of their fierce independence, their courage, their unyielding will. She had always been curious about them, about what lay beyond her own people's insular world. As the ship neared, Calla stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest, unsure of what this encounter would mean. The ship touched down with a soft thud, the sound reverberating across the plains. The door slid open with a hiss, and out stepped a human man, tall and broad-shouldered, his skin tanned from the harsh environments of space. He wore a suit that looked practical, designed for exploration rather than military purposes, and his eyes dark and intense surveyed the landscape as though he had seen it all before. But it was the way he looked at her that caught Calla off guard. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. He simply stared at her as if he saw something no one else had ever seen. Not the giant, not the outcast, not the threat. He saw her. He saw her. For a moment, Calla stood frozen, unsure of how to react. No one had ever looked at her this way, not since her youth. Not since the last time she had seen her mother's face before the old matriarch had passed. The human man didn't flinch, didn't move away. He simply walked toward her, each step measured and confident. Calla's breath caught in her throat as he approached, every instinct telling her to retreat, to run. But something held her in place, something stronger than fear, something almost welcoming. When he reached her, he extended his hand. "My name is Dorian," he said in a voice that was deep and steady. "I'm here to help." Calla's heart thundered in her chest, and for the first time in her life, she felt as though the world had shifted, as though everything she had known was about to change. Calla's mind raced, her heart still pounding in her chest as she stood in the presence of this stranger, a human who dared approach her without fear. His words hung in the air, simple yet profound. "I'm here to help." It was a phrase so foreign, so different from everything she had ever experienced. Help? No one ever sought to help her. No one even dared to look her way unless they had something to gain. To her people, she was a weapon, an untamed force that was better kept at arm's length. Yet, this human seemed to view her as something else entirely, something worth approaching. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, unsure of what to say. Her massive hands twitched at her sides, her fingers itching to either reach out or pull back. Her towering figure was a barrier, a wall of muscle and strength that had kept the world at bay for years. Yet here he was, this human, standing in front of her with his gaze unwavering, his posture calm and confident. "Why?" Calla finally asked, her voice low and rough, the words heavy with the weight of years of solitude. "Why would you help me? What do you see when you look at me?" Dorian stood there for a long moment, his gaze shifting slightly, considering her question carefully. It was clear that he had not expected it. Most would have asked why he was here, what his purpose was. But Calla's question was different. It was not born of curiosity, but of desperation to understand why someone would see her as more than just a beast of burden, more than an outcast. "I see a person," he said, his voice steady and genuine. "I see a life that has been overlooked, but not unworthy of attention. I see someone who has been misunderstood, and I see the strength in you, not just in your size, but in your will to stand alone." Calla's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, the world around her seemed to still. The wind, the distant sound of the twin suns setting, it all faded into the background as his words hit her like a tidal wave. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever acknowledged her as a person. They had seen her as a tool, a weapon, a failure of nature. But this human Dorian saw her for who she was. "You," Calla began, her voice trembling slightly. You don't fear me? He shook his head. No, I don't. I know what you are capable of, and I don't fear strength. I respect it. The silence between them grew thick with unspoken understanding, as Kala processed his words. The shame that had plagued her for years, this fear of being too much, too large, too powerful, began to dissolve, replaced by something foreign and terrifying. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't destined to be alone. That there was someone out there who didn't see her as a curse, but as a person worth knowing. Why are you here? She asked again, her voice more insistent this time, though her tone softened. What do you want from me? Dorian's gaze never wavered. I'm here because I've heard stories about the Aravi. I've studied your people, and I know you have been abandoned by your own. I'm not here to take anything from you, Kala. I'm here to offer you a chance at something different. A chance to escape this isolation. Kala stared at him, still processing his words. It was a strange feeling, this unfamiliar warmth in her chest. It was something she hadn't felt in so long that she had almost forgotten what it was like. Compassion. Genuine, raw compassion. I don't belong anywhere, she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The Aravi don't want me. They're afraid of me. They don't understand me. I know, Dorian said softly, his voice a steady reassurance. But maybe they need to learn too. You don't have to be alone anymore, Kala. You don't have to carry that burden by yourself. For the first time in years, Kala felt something stir inside her, a flicker of hope, a possibility that she had long ago given up on. Could this human be the answer she had been seeking? Could he truly help her? Dorian held out his hand, a gesture of solidarity, of connection. I'm offering you a chance to leave this place, to come with me. You deserve more than this planet, more than this isolation. I can show you a world where your strength is appreciated, where you can finally belong. Kala looked down at his hand, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. Could she trust him? Could she trust anyone, after all these years? But there was something in Dorian's eyes, a sincerity, a calm confidence that made her want to believe him. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something other than bitterness. She felt a longing, a desire for something better, something beyond the confines of her lonely existence. With a deep breath, Kala slowly reached out and took his hand. Chapter 2, A New Beginning. The journey away from Valor Prime was not an easy one. Not just because of the physical distance between the planet and the stars, but because of the emotional weight Kala carried with her. As the ship Dorian's vessel rose from the surface of the planet and ascended into the void of space, she looked out the window, watching as the familiar landscape of her home world slowly receded into the distance. For the first time in her life, she felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. She had never left Valor Prime. She had never left the stifling walls of Rinnoc, the city that had always made her feel so out of place. Now, as the planet shrank into the distance, she realized that she had taken a step into the unknown, into a future she had never dared to imagine. Dorian had been kind and patient with her throughout the journey. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were always filled with encouragement and understanding. He never pushed her, never made her feel like she was an outsider on his ship. For the first time, Kala felt as though she wasn't just some towering, monstrous presence. For the first time, she felt like she could just be a person, not a weapon. As the days passed, Kala began to learn more about Dorian and his people. He was a traveler, a scavenger of sorts, who roamed the galaxy in search of ancient technologies and artifacts. He had no home, no family, no purpose other than to wander and explore. But in his eyes, Kala saw something different, deep desire to find meaning, to connect with something greater than himself. It was this shared loneliness, this unspoken bond between them, that had drawn Kala to him. One evening, as they sat together in the ship's small galley, Kala finally spoke of her past, of the years of rejection, of the constant isolation she had endured. She spoke of her mother, the Shatterbone matriarch, and the expectations that had been placed upon her as a child. She spoke of the fear she had lived with her entire life, the fear of being too much, too different, and yet, at the same time, never enough. Dorian listened without interruption, his gaze never leaving hers as she spoke. When she finished, there was a long silence between them, a silence filled with understanding. You don't have to be defined by your past, Kala, Dorian said softly. You are who you choose to be. Your strength, Your size, those are not your weaknesses. They are your gifts. And you can use them however you want. Kala didn't know how to respond to that. She had never considered that her size, her strength, could be seen as something good. She had always believed it was a curse, something that separated her from everyone else. But in Dorian's eyes, she saw a different perspective, a chance for redemption, for acceptance. She nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling in her chest. For the first time in her life, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could finally become the person she was meant to be. As the ship glided through the stars, Kala realized that her journey had only just begun. The future was wide open, and for the first time, she felt ready to face it. As the days stretched into weeks, Kala's transformation became more than just physical. The weight she had carried for so long, both the literal burden of her size and the emotional weight of her solitude, began to lift, bit by bit, under Dorian's steady presence. The ship was small, more like a mobile base than a proper vessel, but it had a charm to it that felt oddly comforting to Kala. Each corner was filled with tools, ancient maps, and relics from different corners of the galaxy. She had never seen anything like it. The human had a way of collecting memories, of keeping pieces of the universe as if they were personal mementos. Each item had a story, a history. There were moments when Kala felt the old instincts stirring, moments when she would look at the stars through the viewport, her mind tugging at the memories of Valor Prime. But those moments grew fewer, as the newness of her situation began to settle in. There was something liberating about the vastness of space, something almost intoxicating. The endlessness of it. The knowledge that the world she had once known was behind her, leaving only the stars ahead. She spent hours with Dorian, learning about the human way of life. At first, she had been hesitant to ask too many questions, unsure of how to form the bonds she so desperately craved. But Dorian had a way of making her feel like an equal, rather than an outsider. He was patient with her, sharing stories of the far-flung worlds he had visited, of the strange creatures and technologies he had encountered. He had a hunger for knowledge, a thirst for discovery, that Kala found both admirable and a little inspiring. In return, she told him stories of her people, of the Oravi and their history, their strengths, and their downfall. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was truly being heard, not as a weapon, not as a beast, but as a person. One day, as they were navigating through a quiet sector of space, Dorian glanced over at Kala, his brow furrowing as though he had something on his mind. The ship was on autopilot, the hum of the engine a steady rhythm that filled the air. "You've been quieter lately," he remarked, his voice gentle but inquisitive. "I can see you thinking about something. Is everything all right?" Kala was silent for a moment, her eyes drifting back to the stars outside the viewport. It was true, she had been quieter. Something had been stirring in her, a question that she hadn't quite been able to put into words. "I'm not sure," she admitted after a long pause. "I feel different. In a way I can't explain. I've never been this far from home before, never been out in the vastness of space like this." Dorian's gaze softened, and he nodded. "I know how that feels," he said, almost to himself. "Being in a place that's unfamiliar. It can feel both freeing and terrifying at the same time." Kala nodded slowly, her fingers grazing the surface of the ship's console. She had never felt like she belonged anywhere before. She had been a giant among her people, a figure of fear and rejection, and yet, now she was here, in a place where she was free to be herself, if only she could figure out who that was. "Dorian," she said quietly, her voice a bit unsure. "Do you ever wonder if you're running away from something? From yourself?" He was silent for a long moment, as though considering her question carefully. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but tinged with something deeper. "I think we all run from something, Kala. But running doesn't always mean you're hiding. Sometimes, it's just a way of moving forward. You have to leave parts of yourself behind to grow, to become something else." Kala's gaze turned to him, her violet eyes searching his face for some deeper meaning. There was wisdom in his words, but there was also a kind of sadness, a recognition that, like her, he had left behind something he couldn't always escape. The silence between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes from shared understanding, a mutual realization that they both had scars, but they didn't have to let those scars define them. Chapter 3: The Call of the Unknown. A few days later, their journey took an unexpected turn. The ship's sensors began to ping, a low, persistent sound that echoed through the control room. Dorian had been in the engine room, working on some diagnostics, but the tone was urgent, so he rushed back to the cockpit. "What is it?" Kala asked, already standing by the console, her hand hovering over the controls. "I'm not sure yet," Dorian replied, furrowing his brow as he examined the readings. "Something's out there, in the next system. The signal is weak, but it's definitely coming from a ship." Kala's interest peaked. "A distress signal?" "Could be," Dorian said, tapping a few buttons to bring up a map of the sector. "But there's no record of any ships in that area. It's practically a dead zone." Without hesitation, he initiated the ship's course change, steering them toward the mysterious signal. As they moved through the black expanse of space, Kala couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn to something bigger than either of them, something that might change everything. The journey to the source of the signal took several hours, the vast emptiness of space playing tricks on Kala's mind. She found herself staring out the viewport more often than not, her thoughts drifting back to her life on Valor Prime, her struggles with her own identity. What would this new chapter bring? Would it be any different than the one before? Was this the moment she would finally find her place in the universe? Or was she destined to remain a wanderer, forever searching for something that didn't exist? The ship entered the next system, and the signal grew stronger. It was faint, but unmistakable, a distress call, definitely. Dorian's fingers danced over the console, his face growing more focused as he narrowed down the coordinates. "Here," he said, pointing to a small asteroid field on the map. "That's where the signal is coming from." Kala's eyes narrowed. "It's an odd place for a ship to be stranded." "I know," Dorian muttered. "That's why we need to investigate. If there's someone out there, we can help." They approached the asteroid field with caution, the ship's engines humming softly as they navigated the dense field of space debris. Kala watched the asteroids drift by, her instincts alert, her senses heightened. There was something about the scene that didn't sit right with her. She couldn't explain it, but she had learned over the years to trust her gut. The closer they got, the more oppressive the silence felt. Then, as they rounded a particularly large asteroid, Kala's eyes widened. Ahead of them, nestled between two massive asteroids, was a ship, a colossal vessel, seemingly abandoned. Its hull was battered, scorched by what appeared to be a violent collision, and there were no signs of life aboard. Yet, the distress signal was unmistakably coming from within. "This isn't just a ship," Kala said, her voice low. "It's an ancient one. I can feel the weight of it." Dorian's gaze flicked to her, then back to the ship ahead. "Let's find out what happened." As the ship approached the abandoned vessel nestled between two towering asteroids, Kala's instincts screamed in warning. Her body, so often a tool of fear and rejection on Valor Prime, was now a vessel of readiness. She could feel the tension in her muscles, the slow, deep breaths filling her lungs as the ship edged closer to the wreckage. Dorian remained calm, his fingers dancing over the control panel, analyzing the data. His steady presence reassured Kala, and she found herself leaning forward, focusing intently on the growing proximity to the derelict ship. There was something undeniably ancient about it, something that didn't belong to the current age of technology. The hull was pockmarked, its structure worn and battered, as though it had been drifting in space for centuries. Kala could almost feel the weight of time pressing against the ship's frame. "Are you sure about this?" Kala asked, her voice quieter than usual, betraying her wariness. It wasn't fear, not exactly, but a deep, unsettling curiosity, a pull toward the unknown that she couldn't explain. Dorian's eyes flicked to her, his expression unreadable. "We need to know what happened here. There could be survivors, or at the very least, valuable information." Survivors. The word echoed in her mind, reminding her of the fragile hope she had left behind on Valor Prime. She had spent so much time convinced that she was too much, that she had nothing to offer. But now, with Dorian beside her, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, a glimmer of hope. What if this was the moment that would change everything? What if this ship held the answers to her questions, the answers to her loneliness? With a firm nod, Kala looked out at the ship again. Her eyes narrowed, focusing on the long-abandoned structure. There was something familiar about it, some deep resonance that made her feel connected to it on a level she couldn't quite place. "We're approaching," Dorian said, pulling Kala from her thoughts. He activated the ship's landing sequence, his voice steady and focused. Prepare yourself. We don't know what we'll find. The ship settled into position with a soft thud, its engine's hum dying away as the quiet of space once again surrounded them. Kala rose to her feet, her imposing figure. The ship drifted silently through the asteroid field, every movement calculated and precise. Kala couldn't take her eyes off the abandoned vessel ahead, her mind racing with questions. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The technology was old-ancient, even but still functional. Its design was sleek, smooth, and imposing, a stark contrast to the jagged rocks that surrounded it. There was something about it that felt familiar, though she couldn't quite place why. Dorian kept his gaze fixed on the view screen, maneuvering their ship closer to the derelict craft. The ship's damaged hull was riddled with deep scorch marks, evidence of a battle or collision. It had been abandoned in a hurry, as though its crew had fled without a second thought. The distress signal, however, was still active, blinking erratically on their console, its origin coming from within the ship itself. "How do we board?" Kala asked, her voice tinged with unease. "We'll have to dock on the outer hull. I'll prepare the airlocks, but I don't think we'll be able to use the usual entryways." "There's no indication of a functioning bridge or hangar bay," Dorian replied, his tone calm but focused. "We'll have to enter through the lower level." As Dorian made the necessary adjustments, Kala looked over at him. She could see the determination in his eyes, the quiet resolve that had drawn her to him in the first place. But beneath it, she could also see a flicker of something else: curiosity, perhaps even a trace of fear. This was no ordinary salvage operation. Whatever had happened to this ship, it wasn't just an accident. There was something more to it. "Are you sure about this?" Kala asked, her voice softer now. "This could be dangerous. We don't know what we're walking into." Dorian met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "We don't have a choice. If there's someone still alive in there, we can help. And if not, we'll find out what happened. We've come this far." Kala nodded slowly, though a feeling of dread crept over her. There was something about this ship that felt wrong, something deeper than the damage it had sustained. But her curiosity, too, was piqued, and as much as she wanted to pull away from the mystery, she knew they had to proceed. The ship groaned as Dorian piloted their vessel to the lower hull of the abandoned craft. He expertly docked, and the airlock sealed with a soft hiss. The sound of their ship connecting with the derelict vessel felt final, as if they were being drawn into something they couldn't escape. Kala took a deep breath, her hand resting on the control panel beside her. The ship was cold, silent, as though it had been frozen in time. She had felt isolation before, but this was different. This was a silence that seemed to stretch for eternity, a silence that clung to everything. And in that silence, she felt an odd sense of familiarity, like this ship, this place, had always been waiting for her. Dorian activated the door controls, and a heavy metallic sound echoed through the chamber. As the hatch opened, they were greeted by the dim, flickering light of the derelict craft's interior. The air was stale, thick with the scent of old metal and dust. "Stay close," Dorian instructed, his voice barely a whisper. "We don't know what's inside." Kala followed him through the airlock, her senses heightened, every step deliberate. The corridor before them was narrow, lined with abandoned equipment, some of it still operational, but most of it clearly damaged. As they moved deeper into the ship, they encountered signs of chaos: shattered control panels, overturned crates, and strange markings on the walls that Kala didn't recognize. Who were these people? Kala murmured as they continued down the hall. "I don't know," Dorian replied, his voice low. "But whatever happened to them, it wasn't an accident. This ship wasn't just abandoned, it was left." They passed a series of rooms, each one filled with broken technology and scattered belongings. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Something about the ship felt alive, as though the very walls were holding secrets. Finally, they reached a chamber at the heart of the ship, where the source of the distress signal was coming from. It was a small room, almost like a command center, though it had been abandoned for what seemed like ages. The walls were covered in strange alien symbols, their meaning completely foreign to Kala. But what caught her attention wasn't the markings, it was the figure sitting in the center of the room. A woman. Or, at least, what appeared to be a woman. Her body was pale and ethereal, almost translucent, her form suspended in a chamber filled with a faint, greenish light. She was connected to the ship's systems by a series of tubes and cables, her body seemingly merging with the technology around her. Her eyes were closed, her face serene, though there was an unmistakable sense of despair in the way her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Dorian stepped forward, his hand hovering over the controls to the chamber. "What is this?" he asked, awe in his voice. Kalla's eyes widened, her heart racing as she took in the scene. "She's alive," Kalla whispered. "But not in the way we think. This isn't just a human woman. This is something else." Dorian nodded slowly, his expression one of disbelief. "She must have been here for a long time. But why is she connected to the ship? What happened to her crew?" Kalla stepped closer to the chamber, her instincts telling her that this was more than just a simple rescue. There was a connection here, a bond between this woman and the ship. Something about her reminded Kalla of herself, of the isolation she had lived through, though the woman's solitude seemed far more profound, far more tragic. As they stood there, silently taking in the gravity of the situation, Kalla suddenly felt a strange sensation. It was subtle at first, just a twinge at the edge of her mind, but it quickly grew stronger, more intense. It was as though the woman's presence was calling to her, beckoning her to do something, to take action. "This ship is alive," Kalla muttered, almost to herself. "It's not just a machine. It's connected to her. We need to wake her up." Dorian looked at her, his brow furrowed. "How? We don't even know what happened here, Kalla. What if she's not what we think she is?" But Kalla was already moving toward the controls, her mind set. "I don't know, Dorian. But I feel it. I can't explain it, but she needs us. We have to help her." Chapter 4, The Awakening. As Kalla's hands moved swiftly over the damaged control panel, she felt a strange pull, as though the ship itself were guiding her movements. She wasn't entirely sure what she was doing, but instinct told her that there was no time to waste. The woman, whoever she was, had been trapped in this state for far too long. The distress signal had been a cry for help, but it had become more than that. It was a plea for release, for freedom. Dorian stood back, watching her work, his face a mix of concern and curiosity. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice tense. Kalla nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen as she began to input a series of commands. "I have to try. She's not just a prisoner here. She's connected to the ship. I can feel it." The control panel sparked to life under her touch, the lights flickering in response. The greenish glow around the woman began to intensify, and Kalla felt a shiver run down her spine as a low hum filled the air. The ship's systems were coming online, responding to her presence, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Suddenly, the woman's eyes opened, her gaze locking onto Kalla's. They were not the eyes of a stranger. They were eyes filled with recognition, as though they had known each other for eons. The woman's lips parted, and her voice, soft and ethereal, filled the room. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice like the sound of wind through leaves, distant and haunting. "You've come for me." Kalla took a step back, her heart racing as she stared at the woman before her. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled faintly, her expression filled with an ancient sadness. "I am not who I once was," she said softly. "I am a keeper of this ship, and it has been my prison. But now, you are here, and you will be the one to free us." This concludes the continuation of Chapter 3 and the beginning of Chapter 4. Let me know how you'd like to proceed, or if you have any adjustments in mind. You said, "Continue Chapter 4 and ending the story." ChatGPT said, "Absolutely. Here is the continuation of Chapter 4 and the conclusion of the story for Too Big to Mate. She was shunned until the human chose her." Chapter 4 continued The Awakening. Kalla stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as the woman's gaze locked onto hers. The air in the room was thick with an electric charge, as if the very ship around them was alive, pulsing with energy. Kalla could feel the warmth of the woman's eyes as though they were reaching deep into her soul. There was something familiar about her, something that called to Kalla in a way she couldn't explain. "You are the keeper?" Kalla asked, her voice a mixture of awe and confusion. "But you're not human. Who are you?" The woman smiled faintly, her ethereal form shimmering slightly, as if her presence were too delicate for the material world. "I was once the guardian of this ship. My race, the Selvan, built it long ago, far before humans or the Oravi even knew of the stars. It was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where knowledge and wisdom could be preserved, a vessel that would traverse the universe, holding secrets long forgotten. But something went wrong. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if remembering something painful, and when she spoke again, her voice was laced with sorrow. A catastrophe struck. My people were wiped out, and I was left behind, tethered to this ship, bound to its systems. I've been waiting for someone to release me, someone strong enough to handle the ship's power. Kala's mind raced. You've been alone all this time? Trapped here? The woman nodded slowly. Yes, for eons. The ship is both a prison and a sanctuary. It feeds on its passengers' emotions, amplifying their essence. It needs someone with strength to bond with it, someone who can navigate its power. I thought I would never see anyone again. And then, you came. The realization struck Kala like a blow. The ship, the pull she had felt, the strange connection, it had all been a signal, a call to her. The ship had been waiting for someone strong enough, someone like her, to release it from its ancient bonds. What do you want from me? Kala asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the decision she knew she had to make. The woman's smile deepened, as if she had expected the question. I want you to take control of the ship, Kala. You are the one who can set it free. The power within the ship is linked to me, but it is also linked to you. Your strength, your size, your will, it is exactly what the ship needs. It is not just a vessel. It is alive, and it has waited for you. Kala's breath caught in her throat. For so long, she had been an outcast, her size and strength viewed as something monstrous. Now, she was being told that her very essence, the thing that had caused her so much pain, was the key to freeing something greater than herself. But could she do it? Could she truly be the one to release this power? You think I can handle it? Kala asked, doubt creeping into her voice. I've never been accepted for what I am. I've always been too much, too strong. I thought my size was my curse. The woman's gaze softened, and for a moment, Kala saw something in her eyes, something that reminded her of her own struggles. You are more than your size, Kala. It's not your strength that has held you back, but your fear. Fear of being too much, of being different. The world has never known what to do with someone like you, but I do. The universe needs strength like yours. You are not a curse. You are the key to the future. Your power, your spirit, these are the things that can change the world. Kala took a deep breath, her heart swelling with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. This was her moment, the moment she had been waiting for, even if she hadn't known it until now. This ship, this woman, this power, it was all leading her to this one choice. She wasn't just a giant. She wasn't just an outcast. She was the one who could change everything. I'm ready, Kala said, her voice steady and sure. I'll do it. The woman's smile was radiant, filled with both relief and gratitude. Then it's time. The ship is yours, Kala. Release us. Kala stepped forward, her massive form casting a shadow over the control console. Her fingers hesitated for a moment over the buttons, but then she pressed them with purpose, feeling the hum of the ship respond to her touch. The air around her crackled, and she felt the ship's energy surge through her, flooding her body with power. It was overwhelming at first, a tidal wave of sensation, but Kala didn't back away. She embraced it, feeling the connection between herself and the ship solidify. She could feel the woman's presence, no longer trapped, but free, moving alongside her. The ship pulsed with life, and Kala realized that she wasn't just controlling it, she was becoming part of it. The walls around them seemed to come alive, the markings glowing with an ancient light. The ship shuddered, and for the first time in centuries, the sound of movement echoed through its corridors. The distress signal, which had been so faint, was now a beacon, sending out waves of energy across the stars. Dorian, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped forward. His eyes were wide with awe and disbelief. Kala, he whispered. It's really happening. Kala nodded, her gaze fixed on the controls, but her mind was elsewhere, feeling the weight of the ship's power and the burden of the choice she had just made. She was no longer just a woman on a journey. She was part of something greater, something that could shape the future. The woman, now fully free from her bond to the ship, stepped toward Kala, her form shimmering with light. You have done it, she said, her voice filled with reverence. The ship is yours, and now, It will carry you wherever you wish to go. The power within it is yours to command. Kala turned to Dorian, her eyes meeting his with a newfound strength. This isn't just my journey, she said, her voice filled with certainty. This is ours. Together, we can do anything. Dorian smiled, his eyes full of admiration and something deeper, something that Kala hadn't expected. I knew it, Kala, he said softly. You were always more than just strength. You were always the key. And with that, the ship, now alive with the combined power of Kala and the Sylvan Keeper, began its journey across the stars, carrying them both into a future filled with endless possibilities. As the ship disappeared into the vastness of space, Kala no longer felt alone. She no longer felt like a monster. She was part of something greater, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly free.